They had expected another easy victory. For years, the alien fleet had moved from world to world, crushing defenses that barely slowed them down. Their ships were vast, their weapons advanced, and their commanders confident that no young civilization could stand against them. They came with arrogance, believing humanity would fall like all the others, a brief resistance before surrender. But on that cold stretch of space where the stars burned pale and distant, they saw something that made them hesitate for the first time. The warship drifted out of the shadows like a predator revealed in the deep ocean. It wasn't massive compared to their carriers or bristling with weapons in the way alien ships displayed power. Yet there was something unsettling in its design. Every angle, every line of its hull looked as if it had been carved with purpose. The human warship did not look ceremonial, nor did it look like a showpiece meant to intimidate. It looked like it was built to fight, to endure, to kill if it had to. That simplicity, that quiet focus on function, made the alien fleet pause. They scanned it a dozen times, running every analysis they could. It wasn't the size that bothered them. It wasn't even the weapons they detected, though the human rail batteries and missile launchers hummed with deadly potential. What froze them was the history they saw written into its scars. Along its armored plates, burn marks and repaired wounds told of battles survived, of enemies faced and overcome. The aliens had never seen such a thing before. Their fleets prided themselves on perfection, ships, polished and flawless, meant to project superiority. But this human warship carried proof that it had bled, and yet it was still here. To the aliens, it was like staring into the eyes of a predator that had already survived more battles than they could count. Predators did not decorate themselves. Predators simply endured until everything else around them was gone. That realization spread through their fleet like a whisper, turning confidence into unease. For the first time, they felt something they had never expected from a so-called primitive race: dread. The humans had called it a destroyer, though the word seemed small compared to the presence it radiated. Within its hull, the crew moved with the precision of those who had been preparing for this moment for a long time. Humanity had studied the alien incursions, had seen colonies fall, and had counted every life lost. They were not new to war. The ship's corridors carried the weight of those memories, and the crew knew they carried the hopes of their people on their shoulders. This was not just another battle. This was humanity's first true stand. The alien fleet adjusted formation, still cautious. Their commanders argued over whether to strike immediately or wait for reinforcements. They told themselves it was strategy, but deep down, they knew something had changed. Every instinct they had honed across years of conquest told them to hesitate. And in that hesitation, the balance shifted. For the first time, the aliens were reacting to humanity, not the other way around. The humans did not waste the moment. They broadcast a signal across the stars, not a plea for peace, but a warning. It was simple, almost quiet compared to the grand speeches of empires. Yet the message carried weight. This is not your hunting ground. Turn back. There was no bravado, no arrogance, only certainty. That certainty unsettled the aliens more than any weapon could have. Inside the command deck, the captain's eyes stayed fixed on the alien fleet. Around them, young officers worked their stations, but their faces were not afraid. They had trained for this day, knowing that humanity's survival might depend on a single ship standing firm. They knew the enemy expected fear, retreat, surrender. Instead, humanity offered defiance, and that defiance carried the power of 1 billion voices refusing to bow. The silence stretched. Alien targeting systems locked on, yet none fired. Human weapons primed, yet they too held steady. In that vast emptiness between stars, it was as though time itself had paused. A fleet built on intimidation now stared at a warship built on survival. They had thought humans fragile, breakable, incapable of resistance. But what stood before them was proof that fragility could forge strength, that survival could shape something fiercer than conquest. And still, the alien fleet did not move. For the first time, their commanders faced a question they had never considered. What if this prey was not prey at all? What if humanity was something different, something dangerous? The answer waited in the silence of that warship's guns, in the steel of its hull, and in the unyielding will of the people inside it. The standoff could not last forever. Both sides knew that one movement, one spark, would ignite the void into fire. The aliens hesitated, but humanity did not flinch. Across every human outpost and colony, people waited, breath held, knowing this moment would decide their future. The destroyer was more than a ship. It was a promise that humanity would not fall quietly into history. As the seconds stretched into minutes, tension thickened like gravity itself. Alien crews whispered in languages humans did not understand, their voices sharp with unease. On the human side, silence reigned, broken only by the hum of systems readying for battle. One side feared loss, the other had already accepted sacrifice, and that difference, though unseen, weighed heavily in the balance. In that vast theater of stars, where empires rose and fell, a single human warship had done what no armada had achieved before. It made an alien fleet freeze. Not because of overwhelming numbers or superior firepower, but because of the simple, undeniable truth that humanity was ready to fight for its place in the galaxy. And then, without warning, a single light flared on the alien flagship. Orders moved through their fleet like a ripple. Engines burned hotter, weapons charged. The hesitation was over. The choice had been made. Humanity's destroyer now stood on the edge of history, staring down a storm that could end everything. But before the first shot was fired, something unexpected happened. Something that would be remembered for generations. Would the aliens press forward and crush the humans as they had crushed countless others? Or would they realize too late that they had awakened something they could never put down? The void held its breath, and the story of humanity's first true warship was only beginning. The first flare of light faded, but the weight it carried lingered like a shadow over every console and every mind aboard the human destroyer. No one moved. Every officer on the bridge knew that one wrong action could change everything. Yet behind that stillness, thoughts raced. The alien fleet, so accustomed to swift domination, had shown hesitation. That hesitation was an opening, a glimpse of weakness. Humanity had been underestimated for so long, but in this instant, the aliens had revealed something deeper, fear of the unknown. The captain didn't speak. He didn't need to. The crew knew what they were a part of. They were the spear point of human defiance, the sharp edge that carried centuries of endurance within its steel. They were not explorers anymore, not dreamers looking for new horizons. They were defenders, pressed into a corner where survival demanded more than courage. They had watched colonies fall. They had buried their own and carried the silence of loss in their hearts. And it was that silence, not bluster or arrogance, that made them strong. The alien fleet, for all its power, could not understand the nature of humanity's strength. Their empires were built on fear. Their ships were built to intimidate, to crush resistance before it began. But humans had never known an easy path. Every step through history had been marked by struggle, against nature, against themselves, against impossible odds. Each struggle had left something behind, lessons etched into culture, scars carved into memory. When the aliens looked at that lone destroyer, what unsettled them was not its weapons. It was the realization that this species had been tempered in struggle long before it ever left its homeworld. Across the galaxy, whispers about humanity had already begun. Scouts who had survived earlier encounters spoke of strange resilience, of outposts that fought to the last, of miners who turned tools into weapons rather than bow their heads. Those whispers were dismissed as exaggeration, stories told by soldiers embarrassed at their own failures. But now, facing the reality of a warship scarred yet standing, those stories no longer seemed like fables. They were warnings. Inside the destroyer, a young officer's hands hovered over his console. The tactical display bloomed with red dots marking enemy ships. They filled the screen like a swarm of predators, each one carrying enough firepower to erase the destroyer many times over. And yet, no order came to retreat. The captain's eyes stayed fixed on the flagship of the alien fleet, as though waiting for something only he could see. Down in the lower decks, engineers moved among the humming systems, checking and rechecking. They knew every creak of the hull, every shiver of the engines. They had patched holes with their own hands in battles past, and now they prepared to do it again. Fear was there, of course, but it did not dominate them. Fear had long ago become a companion, one they had learned to carry without letting it crush their resolve. In the crew's mess, whispers spread quietly. Some wondered if this would be their last stand, if humanity's hope had been placed on a single fragile blade of steel. Others believed this was only the beginning, that if they endured here, humanity would rise stronger than anyone could imagine. Nobody knew the truth, but all of them, from the youngest recruit to the oldest veteran, understood that history was being written in real time around them. For the aliens, this was not how it was supposed to unfold. They had charted humanity as a Tier 2 civilization, barely stepping into the greater expanse of the galaxy. Their analysts had dismissed human technology as crude, their ships as inefficient, their tactics outdated. Yet here was a destroyer that stood firm under their gaze, refusing to yield. That refusal unsettled them more than weapons could. Empires that rely on conquest are always uneasy when faced with those who refuse to bow. And still, the aliens hesitated. Commanders barked orders, yet delays rippled through their fleet. What was it about this ship that froze their will? Was it the cold efficiency of its design, the scars etched across its hull, or was it the silence of its captain, who did not rush to fire, who did not scramble to beg for mercy? The humans simply waited, and that waiting pressed on the alien fleet like a weight heavier than any gravity. Back on Earth, the news had not yet spread. Families still lived their lives in fragile normality, unaware that a single destroyer was holding the line against a storm. Yet, in military command rooms, eyes were locked on the same feed the destroyer's crew saw. Every leader, every strategist, every analyst understood that this moment mattered more than any before. If humanity faltered here, the aliens would crush them without pause. But if humanity endured, even for a single battle, it would prove that resistance was possible. The destroyer was not the largest ship in humanity's fleet, but it had become the symbol of all their defiance. Its crew did not know it yet, but across hidden bases and scattered outposts, soldiers and civilians alike were whispering its name, passing it like a torch in the dark. It had become a promise. Humanity would not vanish quietly. Still, the standoff dragged on. The alien flagship's engines pulsed brighter, but no weapons fired. Their commanders exchanged coded signals, trying to mask the unease creeping through their formation. They had fought countless battles and broken countless species, but never before had their prey stared back at them with such calm defiance. Inside the human destroyer, a single sound broke the silence, the steady heartbeat of the ship's sensors picking up fluctuations in alien formation. The crew leaned closer to their stations, tension thickening in the air. They knew what was coming, but no one knew when. The anticipation was almost worse than the battle itself. The captain finally spoke, his voice low but steady. He did not give a speech. He did not tell them what they already knew. He simply gave one order: hold, and they did. Every hand stayed ready, every system primed, every nerve stretched tight. Across the void, the alien fleet shifted like a storm preparing to break. Their hesitation would not last forever. The destroyer's crew knew that. Yet in the silence before fire, humanity had already won something greater than victory. They had shown their enemy that they were not prey. Still, the storm gathered. Engines flared, weapons hummed, signals flashed. The alien fleet was on the edge of striking, and the destroyer braced for impact. But even as the shadow of war loomed, another thought crept into the hearts of the crew. If they survived this, humanity's place in the galaxy would never be the same again. The void trembled with the weight of decisions yet to be made. Somewhere in the alien flagship, a commander's hand hovered over the order to fire. Somewhere in the human destroyer, a finger hovered over the trigger of retaliation. The moment stretched, unbearable, and then silence, stillness, waiting. The story was not yet decided, but every soul aboard the destroyer knew one truth. Whatever came next, humanity would meet it standing. The stillness of the standoff stretched on, but it was not the kind of quiet that brought peace. It was the silence before a storm, the taut moment when the smallest motion could shatter everything. The alien fleet hung in formation like a wall of iron, their weapons humming with restrained energy. The human destroyer drifted at the edge of that formation, a lone figure staring down a crowd, defiant but outnumbered beyond reason. Inside the destroyer, the tension pressed on the crew like a weight. They moved with care, speaking in clipped voices, each sound echoing louder than it should. On the command deck, every display glowed with warnings and shifting data as alien ships adjusted their positions. But despite the threat, no order came to fire. Both sides seemed locked in a game of endurance, waiting to see who would break first. The captain kept his eyes on the alien flagship. His silence wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. Every scar on their hull had been earned from studying enemies, from watching and waiting until the right moment revealed itself. This was no different. Yet even he felt the edges of the unknown pressing in. The aliens were unlike any humanity had faced before. Their technology was older, refined over centuries. Their fleet carried experience in war that spanned generations. And yet, despite all that, here they were hesitating. That hesitation was fragile, and fragile things could shatter without warning. Down in engineering, the chief moved among the humming cores, his hands smudged with grease and sweat. He knew the destroyer's systems were strained. Repairs from previous battles had never been fully complete, and there were weak points they could not afford to show. He didn't speak of it, though. The crew needed to believe their ship was unbreakable, even if he knew every weld and seam by memory. To him, the destroyer was not just steel, it was survival, and he would hold it together with his bare hands if he had to. Elsewhere, in the quiet of the crew's quarters, younger recruits whispered of what might come. Some had never seen combat before, their eyes wide with fear they tried to hide. Others, hardened by skirmishes on outposts, spoke with grim certainty. One of them traced a finger along a small carved token he carried, a piece of metal salvaged from a destroyed colony ship. To him, it was a reminder of why they fought, of what had already been taken. These small stories spread across the crew, weaving them together in a shared resolve. On the alien side, the tension was different. Aboard the flagship, commanders argued in clipped tones, their language sharp and filled with impatience. They could not understand why the humans had not fled. Every species they had conquered had chosen one of two paths: surrender or destruction. But these humans lingered, their single ship refusing to yield. It unsettled the chain of command, and doubt began to seep into their discipline. Soldiers who had marched across countless worlds now hesitated, not because of numbers, but because of the unknown. Among the alien officers, a smaller voice raised a warning. Perhaps this was not a lone ship, perhaps more waited in the shadows. The idea spread quickly, a spark of fear turning into a quiet murmur across the fleet. Their sensors had found nothing, but the scars on the destroyer's hull whispered of battles survived against impossible odds. How could one ship endure so much unless it was backed by something greater? The suggestion alone was enough to seed doubt, and doubt in a fleet was as dangerous as any weapon. Back on Earth, the silence of waiting was just as heavy. In hidden bunkers and secure stations, leaders watched the live feeds with rigid faces. They knew the destroyer could not win a direct battle against such overwhelming force. Yet retreat was impossible. This single ship had become a symbol, and symbols had to endure. If it fell too quickly, hope across the colonies would fracture. If it held, even briefly, it would prove humanity was not helpless. And so, orders had been sent in secret. No retreat, no surrender. Hold the line. Among the colonies, rumors were already spreading. Messages passed through smuggled channels through miners and traders who had heard whispers of the stand. A human warship faced the alien fleet, and they stopped. The words passed from mouth to mouth, growing with each telling. Some said the aliens had already turned back. Others said the destroyer had destroyed entire carriers in a single strike. The truth was simpler, but in desperate times, hope grew like fire, feeding on whatever spark it could find. Back on the destroyer, the crew could feel that weight, the knowledge that eyes across humanity were fixed on them. Yet they didn't allow it to overwhelm them. Instead, it hardened their resolve. Each man and woman aboard knew they were not just fighting for their own lives. They were fighting for Earth, for the colonies, for a place in the galaxy. Humanity had been dismissed as fragile, as young, as unprepared. But fragility could hide iron, and youth could carry fire. The alien fleet shifted again, closing the circle tighter. Warnings flashed across the human displays. Still no attack came. The crew braced themselves, hands hovering over controls, eyes locked on their captain. He raised his hand, steady, signaling patience. Patience was a weapon, too, though not one often used in battle. In the lower decks, the medics prepared quietly. They laid out supplies, checked their systems, whispered prayers. They knew what battle could bring, but they also knew that their work was what kept the destroyer alive after every strike. Each scar on the hull had been mirrored in their medbay. In the bodies they stitched back together. They carried those memories too, and they would be ready again. On the alien flagship, the commanders grew restless. Pride pressed against caution. They could not allow their fleet to appear weak. To hesitate too long before prey was shameful. Yet the fear gnawed at them, quiet but sharp. What if striking this ship unleashed something larger? What if the humans were waiting for them to act first? In their hesitation, arguments turned bitter, and unity began to fracture. The conflict now stretched across more than ships and weapons. It was a battle of wills, of perception. Humanity, small and scarred, had forced an empire to pause. That pause, whether it lasted seconds or hours, was already rewriting the balance of power. Every moment that ticked by, the tension deepened, and both sides knew the storm had not yet broken. The destroyer's crew could feel it in their bones, the inevitable clash drawing nearer. The silence would not last forever. Somewhere in that fleet, a commander would give the order, and fire would rip through the void. Yet even in that certainty there was something else, an understanding that whatever happened here would echo far beyond this one battle. For now the void held still. The destroyer remained locked in its place, a lone scarred predator facing a pack. The aliens shifted, restless. Earth waited, breathless. And history lingered at the edge of a trigger, suspended in a silence so heavy it seemed almost alive. The question was no longer whether the battle would come. The question was what humanity would reveal when the first shot finally tore through the stars. The void between the fleets grew heavier with each passing second, a silence so taut it felt as though it might snap at any moment. Every man and woman aboard the destroyer felt it pressing against their lungs, every beat of their hearts echoing with the knowledge that this was no ordinary standoff. This was history's hinge, and whether it turned toward survival or extinction would be decided in the next breath. The alien fleet hovered in perfect formation, their countless vessels surrounding the lone human warship like predators circling a wounded animal. And yet, none moved closer. None fired. The captain stood still, his gaze locked on the alien flagship that loomed like a shadow across the stars. His crew waited, hands poised above controls, but he gave no order. Patience was not inaction. Patience was a weapon, one as sharp as any missile. Every moment the destroyer held firm. Every second the humans refused to yield. Their presence cut deeper into the enemy's confidence. And the aliens felt it. They had the numbers, they had the firepower, but what they did not have was certainty. Down in engineering, the chief tightened a line with hands that trembled slightly, though not from fear. He had seen warships burn, had pulled survivors from wreckage, and knew that battles were not won by perfect systems, but by the determination of those who held them together. He whispered to the ship as he worked, as though the destroyer itself could hear and respond. "Hold together a little longer," he murmured. "Just a little longer." On the mess deck, recruits sat shoulder to shoulder, their voices hushed but urgent. They traded stories to keep the fear from their throats, stories of Earth, of the blue oceans and green forests they had left behind, of cities alive with music and light. To them, Earth was more than a world. It was the reason they would not bow. Each memory became fuel, each word a reminder that what they defended was worth the risk of dying among the stars. The aliens, however, were beginning to crack. On the flagship, the command chamber was filled with tension that mirrored the human destroyer. The High Commander barked questions, demanding answers from sensor crews who could give none. No additional human ships appeared on scans. No reinforcements emerged from hidden corners of space. Yet unease spread like infection among the officers. The destroyer's silence unnerved them more than open defiance would have. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of something waiting, something prepared. Among their ranks, younger alien officers began to whisper. What if the humans were baiting them? What if this one warship was only the first piece of a trap? Their empire had never been challenged like this before. They had always been the hunters. But now, for the first time, the question lingered. Had the prey grown teeth? On Earth, the situation was no less tense. In hidden command centers, military leaders sat rigid around glowing tables, watching the live streams of alien movements. Some argued for sending more ships, others warned that exposure would doom them all if the aliens saw Earth's full strength too soon. Voices rose, but in the end, silence fell there too. Every leader knew the truth. They could not intervene. The destroyer stood alone, and the fate of humanity stood with it. In the colonies, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Whispers carried through crowded bars and mining tunnels. The aliens stopped. The humans made them stop. Hope grew, fragile but fierce. Families who had been planning escape routes now held their ground. Children whispered of the destroyer as though it were more legend than ship. And though the crew aboard her could not hear it, their defiance had become a light burning across worlds. Back on the destroyer, the captain's voice finally broke the silence. One word, steady and calm. Ready? It was not a command to fire, but a signal to steel themselves. Every station tightened, every officer straightened. The destroyer's systems hummed louder as weapons armed silently. The crew's eyes flickered with determination, knowing that the storm was about to break. The aliens saw the movement. Their sensors lit with activity, registering the shift in power levels, the subtle preparations. Warnings filled their communication channels. To them, it looked as though the humans had chosen their moment. Orders crackled through the fleet, telling ships to brace for battle, to prime their own weapons, to prepare to strike. The space between the fleets, once empty and silent, now bristled with invisible energy. Missiles waited, railguns stood loaded, shields glowed faintly under the stress of anticipation. And yet still, no shot had been fired. On the destroyer's lower decks, the med bay lit with preparation. Medics strapped down equipment, secured stretchers, checked their supplies with practiced precision. They knew that if the battle began, This room would be the difference between life and death for many. Yet even as they worked, they carried the same thought: better to be prepared and never needed than to be caught unready. Above, the captain finally leaned forward, eyes never leaving the alien flagship. "They're waiting for us," he murmured, almost to himself. "Let them wait." His words spread through the crew like fire. They understood. Every second of hesitation on the alien side was another second of victory for humanity. On the alien flagship, the arguments grew sharper. Pride battled with fear. Some commanders demanded immediate attack, unwilling to let their fleet appear weak. Others counseled caution, reminding their peers that a single mistake could turn triumph into disaster. The humans were untested, unpredictable, and unpredictability was dangerous. The High Commander's clawed hand hovered over the control to give the final order, but it did not fall. Even he hesitated, feeling something he had not known in decades of conquest: doubt. The standoff had become more than ships staring across the void. It had become a battle of spirit. Humanity, battered and scarred, stood firm in silence. The aliens, flawless and numerous, wavered in uncertainty. That shift of balance, invisible but undeniable, crept deeper with every passing heartbeat. And then, like lightning in a storm, the moment shifted. A warning blared across the destroyer's bridge. Alien targeting systems had locked on. The captain's jaw tightened. His officers' hands hovered over controls, seconds from unleashing everything they had. The void between them bristled with the promise of fire. For the crew, time seemed to slow. Some thought of Earth, of faces they might never see again. Others thought only of the enemy before them, the wall of ships that had brought destruction to so many worlds. Each heartbeat was louder than the last. The air itself seemed to hum with tension. On the alien flagship, orders clashed again, but this time the tide was turning. Pride was winning over fear. Their weapons charged, their engines flared brighter. A single spark now could ignite the void into war. And then came the smallest movement, a tremor of light, a shift of formation, an unmistakable signal. The alien fleet was preparing to strike. On the destroyer, alarms shrieked as targeting locks multiplied across the screens. The crew tensed, every nerve stretched to breaking. Their weapons stood ready, their shields braced, but they knew the scale of what loomed against them. The aliens had chosen the moment. The captain's voice cut through the chaos, calm and certain. "Stand ready." The destroyer held its ground, waiting on the knife's edge of history. The alien fleet braced for its strike. Earth waited in silence, and the void itself seemed to tremble as both sides stood one breath away from the fire that would decide the fate of humanity. The climax loomed, close enough to touch, and every soul in the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The targeting locks burned red across the destroyer's displays, a wall of hostile intent pressing down from every angle. The alien fleet had chosen its moment, pride finally drowning out hesitation. Every console aboard the human ship screamed with warnings. Every officer felt the weight of inevitability in their chest. Yet the destroyer did not fire first. It stood silent, coiled like a spring, waiting for the storm to break. Then the unexpected happened. From the far edge of the system, sensors flared with new contacts. At first, the crew thought reinforcements had arrived, some hidden fleet sent by Earth or a colony they hadn't known was nearby. But the readings were strange, too fast, too fragmented to be human ships. On the alien flagship, alarms rose in equal measure as their sensors picked up the same anomaly. Dozens of signatures, then hundreds, flickering into existence like sparks across the dark. The captain narrowed his eyes as the data poured in. The contacts were neither human nor alien. Their designs did not match any recorded fleet. They were something else, an unknown presence slipping into the void at the worst possible moment. The bridge went silent, save for the hum of consoles. Every officer stared at the growing display of ships. Were they friend, foe, or something far worse? The alien fleet shifted, their perfect formation faltering. The new arrivals unsettled them even more than the destroyer had. For the first time, they pulled part of their attention away from the human warship and turned it outward, scanning desperately. Their hesitation deepened, and in that hesitation, humanity found a new thread of possibility. But the readings only grew stranger. The newcomers did not advance as a fleet should. They scattered, slipping through the edges of the system, as though testing the waters of conflict without fully revealing themselves. Their signals were faint, their communication patterns fragmented like whispers on the edge of hearing. In the destroyer's mess, recruits whispered nervously. "Who are they? More enemies? Another empire?" No one had answers. The only certainty was that the battlefield had grown far more complicated. The captain leaned closer to the displays. "They're not here for us," he said at last, his voice steady but grim. "They're watching." That one word, watching, sent a chill through the crew. A new intelligence, unknown and unseen, had chosen this moment to reveal itself. The destroyer was no longer just facing an alien fleet. It was under the gaze of something greater, something that waited in silence as though measuring both sides. On the alien flagship, panic flickered beneath their discipline. Their empire prided itself on dominance, on knowing the field before a battle began. Yet here was an unknown force they could not classify. Their pride demanded they strike the humans, but their instincts whispered caution against the newcomers. Every decision carried the risk of disaster, and every second of hesitation chipped away at their certainty. The destroyer's crew felt the shift as well. Their war was no longer a simple fight for survival. It was unfolding beneath the eyes of another player, a player whose intentions were hidden. Some aboard the ship wondered if the newcomers might be allies, if perhaps another civilization had chosen this moment to intervene against the alien conquerors. Others feared the truth might be darker, that humanity had only stumbled into a larger game, one in which their survival was little more than a piece on the board. Back on Earth, analysts scrambled as the signals reached their screens. The unknown contacts sent ripples through the command centers. Theories erupted, lost civilizations, ancient fleets awakened, a hidden power revealing itself. But no theory answered the deeper question. Why here? Why now? What did they want with this battle? In the colonies, the whispers grew louder. News of the destroyer's defiance had already spread, but now the story twisted with fresh uncertainty. "Others are watching," they said. "Others are coming." For some, it was a promise of aid. For others, it was a shadow of doom. Humanity's fate, once a duel between itself and the alien empire, now felt tangled in threads of a much larger web. On the destroyer, the crew braced as the unknown ships flickered closer to the battle zone. Their movements were deliberate, circling, never committing. It was the behavior of predators sizing up prey. And though the aliens had come expecting to be the hunters, for the first time they looked like prey themselves. The alien fleet grew restless. Some of their ships edged forward, their weapons pulsing with restrained firepower as though they could burn away their fear by striking first. Others pulled back slightly, uneasy at the idea of exposing themselves too soon. Their perfect unity fractured, and in those fractures humanity glimpsed hope. But hope was fragile. The destroyer's crew knew that the aliens could still crush them in seconds if they chose. And now, with another power watching, the outcome carried consequences none of them could predict. The captain's voice rang across the bridge, low but certain. "They want us to act. Both of them. The aliens want us to flinch, and the newcomers want to see what we'll do. But we won't be their game." His words steeled the crew. They were not just defending themselves anymore. They were representing all of humanity under the gaze of unknown eyes. Everywhere aboard the destroyer, preparations deepened. Engineers reinforced weak points, medics readied their stations, gunners kept their fingers inches from triggers. The silence of waiting became a roar in their minds, louder with every passing moment. On the alien flagship, decisions reached a breaking point. Pride would not allow them to back down before prey, not in front of an audience. Orders rippled through their fleet. Engines roared to life, weapons glowed brighter, and the perfect machine of war turned back toward the destroyer with renewed determination. But as their ships shifted into attack formation, the newcomers moved as well. The flickering signatures drew closer, their positions tightening like a net. Both humans and aliens felt the change immediately. The observers were no longer content to remain at the edge. They were moving in, closing the circle around the battlefield. For the first time, both fleets felt the same cold truth. They were not in control. The destroyer and the alien armada alike had become players on someone else's stage, and that realization carried more terror than any weapon. The crew of the destroyer watched the screens, their breath catching as the unknown signals multiplied, spreading like shadows across the void. The captain's jaw tightened, his hands steady, though even he felt the enormity of what loomed before them. It was no longer just about survival. It was about proving to these hidden watchers that humanity would not break, no matter the odds. The aliens, too, understood. Their pride demanded a strike against the humans, but their survival now depended on not showing weakness before the newcomers. The battlefield had transformed into something larger, a proving ground. And in that proving ground, a single mistake could end not just a battle, but entire civilizations. The void between the fleets trembled with anticipation. Missiles waited, railguns gleamed, shields glowed. The destroyer held steady, its scarred hull defiant under the eyes of two enemies. The alien fleet bristled, pride and fear colliding in every motion. And the newcomers, silent and unseen, crept closer, watching with the patience of hunters waiting to see which prey would fall first. The captain's voice came once more, steady as steel. "Whatever happens next, we hold." The destroyer braced on the knife's edge of history as the alien fleet prepared to strike and the unknown force drew near. The silence before fire deepened, unbearable. Humanity stood not just against one enemy now, but beneath the gaze of many. And somewhere, just beyond the range of sensors, a new signal flickered to life. Different from the rest. Stronger. Closer. The tension twisted tighter, the stakes rising higher than ever as the void itself seemed to whisper. The true storm was only beginning. The silence shattered in an instant. The alien fleet surged forward, their weapons igniting the void with blinding streams of energy, a tide of destruction bearing down on the lone human destroyer. The crew braced themselves, hands gripping consoles, hearts pounding with the knowledge that this was the moment everything would either collapse or change forever. The first barrage struck, shields flaring and buckling under the force, alarms screaming through the ship. Metal groaned as though the vessel itself felt the weight of inevitability pressing against its hull. Yet through the chaos, the destroyer held its ground. The captain's voice cut through the noise, firm and unwavering. "Return fire! Everything we have!" Railguns thundered, missiles streaked into the darkness, and the destroyer struck back with all the fury of a civilization refusing to bow. The first alien vessel shuddered under the onslaught, its shields cracking like glass before it erupted into fire. Cheers broke out across the bridge, fleeting sparks of hope amid the storm. But the aliens did not falter. Their pride, their hunger for dominance, pushed them forward with relentless force. The void lit with fire as the two sides clashed, the lone human ship standing against an empire. And then the newcomers moved. The strange signatures that had circled the battlefield surged inward. At first, both humans and aliens thought they had chosen their target, that they had come to crush one side and end the battle in a single stroke. But what followed defied every expectation. Their ships swept through the void with speed and grace no eye could follow, weaving between the human and alien fleets, striking neither directly. Instead, they unleashed bursts of energy that scrambled targeting systems, distorted sensors, and twisted space itself. The battlefield became chaos. The destroyer's systems flickered, its crew fighting to regain control. Alien ships collided in confusion, their perfect formation splintering as their pride gave way to panic. For the first time, both sides realized the truth. The newcomers were not here as allies or enemies. They were here as arbiters. This was not just a battle, it was a trial. The captain steadied himself, eyes narrowing as he understood. They want to see who deserves to stand. Those words carried like fire through the crew. Humanity was being judged not by their weapons alone, but by their resolve. The aliens, too, seemed to understand, though their pride twisted the truth into something darker. They would win by force, prove their dominance before the unseen jury. Their flagship roared forward, larger than cities, weapons flaring with power meant to erase the destroyer from existence. The captain stood tall, refusing to yield. Aim everything at their flagship. If we fall striking at the heart. The crew obeyed without hesitation. Missiles screamed across the void. Railguns spat molten metal. Energy lances burned brighter than suns. The destroyer's final assault tore into the alien flagship with unrelenting fury. Its shields trembled, shattered, and for a brief, breathtaking moment, the pride of the alien empire cracked under human fire. But the aliens were not beaten yet. In desperation, the flagship unleashed a weapon never seen before, a beam that tore through the void like a wound, slicing toward the destroyer with unstoppable force. The crew had seconds, maybe less. There was no shield strong enough, no maneuver swift enough. The beam would end them, and then the unexpected twist came. The newcomers intervened. Their ships darted into the path of destruction, their energy fields colliding with the alien weapon. Space itself bent, folding in on the clash of forces. The beam fractured, scattering into nothingness. The alien flagship staggered, crippled not by human weapons, but by the silent judgment of the unknown watchers. The void fell into eerie quiet. Both the destroyer and the alien fleet hung in the aftermath, shaken by what had just occurred. The newcomers had chosen not to destroy, not to conquer, but to show where true power lay. The alien flagship reeled, its pride broken beyond repair. Their fleet faltered, hesitation rippling through every vessel. For a race built on dominance, to be checked so easily by a greater force was a wound deeper than any weapon could deliver. They began to withdraw, their silence speaking louder than any threat. Pride had been their strength, but in this moment, it became their defeat. On the destroyer, the crew barely dared to breathe. Against all odds, they had survived. Not because they were the strongest, but because they refused to surrender. That refusal had been enough to prove their worth under the watchful eyes of the newcomers. Humanity had been tested, and for now, they had passed. The captain stood at the heart of the bridge, his gaze fixed on the strange ships that lingered in the void. They did not advance, nor did they retreat. Their presence was steady, as though reminding both sides of their place in a larger design. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the signals began to fade. One by one, the unknown ships slipped back into the darkness, vanishing beyond the reach of sensors, leaving only silence in their wake. The crew exchanged uncertain glances. Had they been spared, chosen, warned? No one could say for certain. But what they knew was that the galaxy had grown far larger than they had ever imagined. Humanity was no longer standing against a single empire. They were part of a stage where unseen powers watched and judged. As the alien fleet drifted into retreat, the destroyer remained, battered but unbroken. The captain allowed himself a breath, a moment of quiet reflection. "This isn't the end," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "It's only the beginning." The officers nodded, their eyes heavy with exhaustion, but burning with determination. They had fought not just for survival, but for dignity. They had faced pride and power, and they had endured. Yet the memory of the newcomers lingered, a shadow of mystery that would never fade. The final twist came not from the void, but from within. As the destroyer's system stabilized, a new signal appeared on the consoles. It was faint, hidden deep within the data the newcomers had left behind. A message, encrypted in a pattern no alien or human system could fully decode. But its intent was clear enough. Coordinates. Somewhere far beyond the known reaches of space, a location had been marked. The crew stared at the data, realizing the truth. The newcomers had not only judged them, they had given them a path. Whether it was an invitation, a challenge, or a warning, no one could say. But it meant the story was far from over. The destroyer drifted in the silence of victory, scarred but alive, carrying within it the seed of something far greater than survival. Humanity had faced annihilation and found its strength, but now it stood on the edge of something larger. The climax of this battle was not an ending, but a doorway, and as the stars burned cold around them, the captain looked once more into the dark, his voice steady. Set a course. Wherever this leads, we'll be ready. The crew nodded, the weight of history pressing on their shoulders. The alien empire had been turned back. The newcomers had revealed themselves, and humanity had earned its place, if only for a moment, among the powers of the galaxy. But in the silence of the void, one truth lingered like a shadow. The true war had not yet begun. The battlefield was quiet now, the stars returning to their ancient stillness as wreckage drifted silently between the two fleets. The human destroyer floated at the edge of it all, battered but still alive, its crew staring into the darkness where the mysterious newcomers had vanished. The alien fleet had pulled back, their retreat not marked by defeat in the traditional sense, but by something deeper. Their pride shattered, their certainty broken. For the first time in centuries, they had been forced to hesitate, and that hesitation had cost them their sense of superiority. Humanity, a species they had once thought of as fragile and unworthy, had stood against them and endured. On the bridge, the crew sat in weary silence, the weight of what had happened slowly settling over them. They had been tested, not only by the alien empire, but by forces far beyond their understanding. And though the destroyer's hull was cracked, though its systems still struggled to hold together, they had survived when logic said they shouldn't have. That survival meant something. It meant the story of this day would ripple far beyond this one ship, carrying into the colonies, into the halls of Earth's leadership, and even into the whispers of alien command councils. The captain remained at his post, his gaze fixed on the faint coordinates left behind in the final encrypted signal from the newcomers. That small detail was what lingered most, the idea that humanity had not only survived, but been chosen. The meaning of it was unclear. Was it a warning, a test to see if they would rise to a greater challenge? Or was it an invitation to step into a role larger than they had ever imagined? He didn't have the answers, and perhaps no one did yet. But what mattered was that the choice was theirs to make. In the lower decks, the crew finally allowed themselves to breathe. Medics tended to the wounded, mechanics patched what they could, and quiet conversations began to spark among the exhausted soldiers and technicians. Stories were already being told, each one carrying its own version of the truth. Some swore the aliens had been on the verge of complete collapse before the newcomers intervened. Others said the destroyer had been seconds from destruction before a miracle saved them. The details shifted, but the heart of it remained the same. Humanity had faced the worst the galaxy could throw at them and had not broken. Back on Earth and across the colonies, the news spread faster than any signal before it. The lone human warship that had faced an alien fleet and lived became a legend almost instantly. To miners on distant rocks, to children in overcrowded stations, to leaders in their fortified chambers, the story carried the same message. Humanity was no longer invisible. They could not be dismissed as weak, not anymore. They had faced annihilation and forced the galaxy to take notice. The alien empire, meanwhile, reeled in its silence. Pride was not something easily restored, and whispers of doubt spread through their ranks. For every soldier who wanted revenge, there were officers who remembered the way the newcomers had bent space itself to their will, intervening without effort. Fear began to creep into their order. For the first time, they had to ask themselves whether their dominance could be challenged, not just by humanity, but by others, yet unseen. And fear, they knew, was far more dangerous than any weapon. As for the newcomers, their absence only made their presence loom larger. Entire teams across Earth and the colonies would spend years trying to decode the fragment of data left behind, debating what it meant. Some saw it as a beacon of hope, others as a trap, but no one could deny the truth. Humanity had been noticed, weighed, and marked for something greater. Whatever came next, the galaxy would no longer overlook them. On board the destroyer, the captain finally allowed his crew a moment of rest. The stars stretched out around them, vast and indifferent, but no longer cold. Each person on that ship carried something more now, a sense of belonging, not just to their vessel or their home, but to history itself. They had been the first to face the impossible, and because of them, the rest of humanity had a chance. The engineers patched the worst of the damage, and the ship's engines hummed weakly back to life. The captain stood once more, giving a single order that carried the weight of every choice they had made. Set a course for home. The crew nodded, their movement steady, filled with pride that no exhaustion could erase. They were scarred, but scars were proof of survival, and survival, they now knew, was victory. As the destroyer turned, leaving behind the drifting wreckage of a battle that would be remembered for generations, a quiet understanding settled over the ship. They had changed the course of human history, not through overwhelming force or sheer numbers, but through willpower, unity, and defiance. They had shown that humanity was more than prey, more than fragile flesh in a hostile galaxy. They were something to be reckoned with. The return journey stretched long, but each passing day the crew felt the weight of their actions growing lighter, replaced by a new sense of purpose. They spoke of what lay ahead, of what the coordinates left by the newcomers might mean, and of how the colonies would respond when they heard the full truth. There was uncertainty, yes, but also excitement. For the first time, humanity was not simply surviving in the shadows of greater powers. They had stepped into the light. When the destroyer finally reached human-controlled space, the reception was unlike anything they had imagined. Stations lit their beacons in welcome. Civilian ships trailed behind them like an honor guard, and messages flooded in from every corner of the colonies. They were not just a warship returning from battle. They were a symbol, proof that humanity could face the galaxy and not bow. The captain gave no grand speeches, no proclamations of glory. Instead, he spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who had seen too much to waste words. We stood when they expected us to fall. That's all the galaxy needs to know. His words traveled across every screen and speaker, simple but powerful. They reminded people of what mattered most, not weapons, not fleets, but the will to endure. That will was what made humanity dangerous to those who underestimated them, and it was what gave them a place in the wider galaxy. And so the story came to its natural end. The alien fleet had been turned back, their pride broken. The newcomers had revealed themselves, leaving behind mystery and promise in equal measure. The destroyer had survived against impossible odds, carrying with it the hope of an entire species. Humanity had proven itself in its first true trial, and though greater challenges waited beyond the stars, they were no longer afraid to face them. As the ship docked and the crew stepped out to the cheers of their people, one truth remained clear. This was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, filled with powers old and new, but humanity had claimed its place among them. Whatever came next, They would face it together. And though the captain never spoke it aloud, a final thought lingered in his mind as he looked once more into the stars. Survival had been the first victory. But the true test, the one hidden in the coordinates waiting far away, was still to come. Humanity was ready. With that, the story of the lone human warship ended, not in silence, but in the echo of hope carried across a galaxy that had finally learned to fear, respect, and remember the name of humankind.